Hey guys, David Robinson here. Welcome to the apartment investing journey. As always, we've got another great guest for you today. I'm excited to have Jason Yarusi with me today. Jason, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
So Jason is the founder of Yarusi Holdings with his wife Pili. They have acquired over 1,100 multifamily units since 2017. He is an avid ultra runner and a workout enthusiast. He hosts the Multifamily Live Podcast. He wakes up daily at 4:32 a.m., is an aspiring ukulele player, and most importantly, father to three amazing kids and also a husband. So, Jason, that's one of my favorite bios thus far. Short and to the point, and some personal stuff in there. So I love that. Our podcast is all about the journey. We'd love to back up and hear about the backstory, how you got into the space, how it's evolved since you did get in the space back in 2017. And so if you don't mind, let's back up. Let's talk about that. What does that look like for you? Where did it all begin?
Sure. So unlike my short bio, the path here, of course, took a lot of routes. We'll say untraditional routes. After college, I moved into New York City. Was in a number of different spaces, everything from opening and starting breweries and restaurants to owning a brewery and selling breweries to other kind of financial applications to traveling to work in Europe for a while. And throughout that journey, a storm happened in New Jersey in the East Coast called Hurricane Sandy. And at that time, my dad, well, still does, for the last basically over 4 decades, has run a heavy construction company where his business was targeted at lifting and moving homes. Now, you can do this for a lot of reasons, but one of the main applications is that people need to raise their homes to hopefully meet FEMA requirements and not flood in the future. So that storm happens, crushes so many homeowners, hundreds of thousands of people on the East Coast. And I'm in New York City. My brother's working for me. I had met Pili, who is my wife. We had met years ago, and we were now a couple. Well, we moved out to New Jersey to help dad, right? Because dad's business goes from doing about 12, 13 projects a year to, if there was 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, we could have used every single second. So that 12, 13 jobs really ramped up to about almost, I think at the peak, about 350, 360 lifts a year, helping homeowners basically get back in their homes. So we went out there, and at that time, Pili was pregnant with our first kiddo. And so we knew with the change we had, one of the growth parts here is that we wanted to get back and really just control the narrative of our time. And we had learned, of course, heard, talked about real estate, but we didn't quite know yet what that really was. So we started diving into what we thought was a logical path. Now, to note, we were, again, working like madmen, and we'll call Pili Mad Lady, just helping the family business along the route here. And we thought we were doing a logical step into real estate, where Pili got a real estate license, and then we started flipping and wholesaling homes. So here we are working these very long days with the construction company. And just like any service business, one of the downsides for a service business is why it's great if you stop working at any time. Well, the revenue stops, right? Just like anything else. So we were looking for something that was going to, of course, feed that narrative and then also control us to get time with our kiddos when we want. However, we quickly discovered we stacked busy on top of busy, right? So we were going further away from that goal here with everything really that was leading into the progress of us learning about real estate. So we kept evolving, trying to figure out what we didn't know. And that led to us doing, Airbnbs, other, new constructions. And we came upon investing out of state. Pili actually met someone who was, buying houses out of state and really putting together a team to buy these single family houses. Well, we were like, well, that's cool. And with all the management we had done in our prior businesses, that really took to us. So we started buying 2s and 3s and 4s. And that was the aha moment. Like, cool, here we are. We're buying these things. We're putting people and empowering others to help not only do their best superpower, but help our projects along. And lo and behold, money starts coming in the mail, right? So one of those great feelings where you start seeing that. But part of that course is we saw that the scalability of that was going to be a train wreck. Trying to do 2, 3s and 4 units 1,000 miles away, we're like, well, this is cool, but we still need to evolve to another point. And I came upon, maybe it was a podcast, someone doing apartment investing. And that was the light bulb moment. That was that moment that I said, man, like that's very interesting. What is that? Because that kind of put all the pieces together. And that was the evolution from going from a 3-unit to our next acquisition was a 94 unit. And that was back in 2017. And that was the first jump off into the path where we are today.
Well, that's a great summary. I appreciate you going into some of that. I want to pick out a few different pieces. First off, just to give us some context, roughly what time frame, what year was it that you guys decided, you know what, we want to take more control? You're working with your father's business. The thing has taken off. You guys are running like crazy, and you said, you know what, I want more control of our time. What does this real estate thing look like? Roughly what time frame was that when you guys started to get into the real estate space?
Sure. 2013, 14.
Okay, perfect. So 2013, 14, what I love about this is that, everybody, looks at people that have been in the space for a little bit of time and sees the success that they've had, and they think it just happens overnight. And you already alluded to this. This has been a process for you, right? And so 2013, 2014, here you guys are starting to think about this, and it's a 3-year process of you threw in a lot of different things, from Pili getting a real estate license to flipping to wholesaling to Airbnb to buying duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes out of state. I'm assuming you sprinkled in some turnkey single family out of state too. So here you are trying all these different things before you get to multifamily. What was it during that time frame that kept you just pushing for different avenues versus staying focused on one of those businesses and really taking it to another level, systematizing it, and getting your time back that way? It's a little bit of it's a poor question, but I'm curious about sort of your mindset around moving to multifamily versus there's plenty of people that have been able to get back their time in the wholesale business by growing and building a legitimate systematized business inside the wholesaling space. Why for you was it a better path to keep going bigger and bigger to buy back some of that time versus staying in one of those little niche real estate worlds and building a business inside of that? Hopefully that's a question that you can answer.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And honestly, the simple answer is, did we like it? Right. So we were doing the pieces and they were serviceable. We were doing good, but it wasn't quite it. Right. And so lots of times you can stay in a space and say, I'm going to do it. Right. And it is what it is, but it wasn't that piece. Right. And we have always been, Pili and myself have always been in places where there hasn't been like a laid track, right? It's not like we got out and we just went into this job and the job laid out, okay, for the next, 3 years of management training, then you'll move up to this space and then this will logically point. So we've been proven on that case to try and discover and pivot accordingly. And that's a lot with life, and even with, managing apartment communities and buying assets, right? It's a lot of just understanding that there is, of course, the perfect game plan, and then there's day one, right? And so part of this is that we were trying these real estate spaces and we were learning a lot, and not to say that, you use this all to your advantage. Most of the time, like when people are doing a path of real estate, being like, or anything in life, I've wasted the last 5 or 10 years. No, if you're at that point to discover that next step in your journey, what's led you there is all the discoveries you've made, whether it be on the path you didn't want to be in, but even if it was, there's tons of experiences, right? Throughout everything I've done, everything from, meeting with, to just manufacturers, or of course, working with clients or contract negotiations, or you name it, right? So pricing, like all these pieces have led to us being more and more successful in our course to where we are today. So the ultimate goal is that we didn't really want to wholesale. Like we saw the benefit of it, but it just wasn't that piece that clicked, right? And so it's one thing to just say, well, yes, we could optimize it, but do we want to? And then that allowed us to take that next step. Okay, what's next?
Yeah, love that. So I would say that you and your wife have done a very good job of, it seems from the outside, me having 4 kids of my own, married, busy with all kinds of, sports and dance and all the things, you guys have done a very good job of integrating family and work. Can you speak to that a little bit? It seems you've been very intentional about that in your space. Number one, is my assumption correct? Do you feel the same way? And two, maybe give us some tips, advice, insights into how you have been able to do that.
You think about life, right? And there becomes a point where your day kind of runs you, and you either choose to change that narrative or you don't, right? And then a lot of people just don't, and then it's constant regret daily, or looking past, or looking back in the past. But you have to set just your things that are hard lines for you, right? And so we started setting those things, and it's amazing when you set in the sand things that you are going to do. I'm going to take my kids to sports. I'm going to be active in their activities. I'm going to be around them. I'll be at dinner, right? That everything else falls in place, because we can all find time back in our day. It's just, are we choosing to, right? Are we setting an importance level on what we want to do? Now, there are certain points, like, I travel and I have to travel for an event coming up where I get to, right? And if you think about that, there's going to be points where we are going out there to do things, and we explain that to the kids, like what we're doing, right? Even when we bring them to the apartment communities that we have in the town we live in, we talk to them about why we're helping these become better places to live and better communities. So we've placed a focus on family, because that's why we're all doing this. And if we didn't do this, then it's completely disrupting the whole point for us going this space in the first place.
Yeah, love that. Well, I want to push forward a little bit and talk about this first acquisition. Well, before we do that, before we talk about your first acquisition, talk to us a little bit about Yarusi Holdings right now. What are you guys focused on? What does your business look like? And what do you guys see moving forward for Yarusi Holdings?
Sure. So we're still very active in the value add multifamily space. We actually disposed of about, I think, 5 assets last year. We did have 5 acquisitions. One of those acquisitions was actually a motel here that we're converting into a short-term rental space. So that's here in our backyard. We have some short-term rental experience. We have a really good group to manage it. So that's one of the outliers. But typically, we're taking on multifamily value add. So that's really our core focus and our core competency. We're looking for properties continuing to be in emerging markets. There's a lot of things happening here in the Southeast with, of course, with drivers being in Nashville and the Atlanta and those submarkets. We still have assets that we have up in Louisville, Kentucky. And that's been good drivers for us. Just following the path of progress, following where people are moving, where the jobs are going, the job diversity, population growth, where there's supply constraints on housing. That continues to allow us to have the runway to find good properties that have the ability to continue to adapt to the growing culture that we're seeing today. We have now looked at the avenues, of course, on just cost of acquisition, looking into development space. So we're under contract on a development here in the same town for a 72 townhome. So we're looking at that option just based on, of course, cost to build versus cost of acquisition, and what you get for a built product compared to that cost of acquisition of a BC asset that has some hair on it, right? So that has some years on it.
Yeah. And for the most part, it seems, at least from what I can tell, that the type of asset that you've targeted is sort of that BC, but generally, 50 to 100 to 150 units. But you're one that has done a lot of transactions in that 50 to 100 space. Tell us a little bit about the mindset around that 50 to 100 space versus a lot of people try to just, bigger is better, bigger is better. And there's probably an argument for that. Maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't, but you guys have done a good job of sort of staying in that space and then managing these assets very well. Talk to us a little bit about your mindset on that.
It is correct, right? So the larger you go, it provides more opportunities. However, what we've done is we've found assets where we can combine assets to get the economies of scale. Right. So we picked up a 76 and a 90 unit down there in Decatur, Georgia to wrap up last year. And it allows us to a quarter mile away from us. So we get the efficiencies between the two. Right. So noting where can we find the efficiencies? However, you do get a larger pool of economies of scale when you move into the larger asset. Typically, the partners, property managers, and others will align in a better fashion. You'll be able to get better pricing and pricing guidance. You also have a different seller pool when you go out to the future. So your business model will change. So the landscape on that side can be very, very attractive. However, when the narrative of just how aggressive, of course, pricing has been on some of the models going over that point, we found that there's still runway in the 50 to 100 space, and that's served us well.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about asset management because one of the challenges, right, in acquiring 50 to 100 unit assets, B, C class, is
Yeah.
that they're management heavy. And, a big part of your business plan is not only managing the project, but managing the asset. And clearly, you guys have done a very good job with that. You've, gone full cycle on 6 deals at this point. It sounds like, I believe you said that six. You've sold six. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
So, is there any insight that you can share at a high level with our listeners about what you've developed from an asset management perspective that's helped you be successful in that space, 50 to 100 units?
Sure. So it gets back to two parts, right? So you have your pro forma, but then you have to engage actively to understand how you're adapting to pro forma. So in a good way right now, we're well ahead of our pro forma rents on most assets, right? And part of that, of course, is driving from the nature of just what's happening in the surroundings, and part of us is from our efficiency. But for that point, if we stuck to our game plan here, you can look at this point where we've been able to throttle on some of the different renovation points that we don't need to do to still get those price points. So as we go into that point here, just understanding the dynamics of the environment around you and adjusting to plan. Right. Then there's the other piece of taking on renovations that can be handled succinctly with the right team members. And there's a certain point where you can allow others to steer. So the management company may handle on the unit terms, but there's going to be certain parts that we want to focus on where it's not their core competency they're doing every day. And that might be the roof replacements, might be the parking lots, might be the concrete work. These things that aren't their everyday status quo, that their pricing may not be as attractive. So noting where should be the big ticket items that you put your focus, how can you have a very streamlined process for them for turns, right? Because part of that is that your biggest downside is when you have units vacant, right? And then you're waiting for them to get turned, right? And so if you are not efficient in that process and continuing to fine tune that process, there's a lot of fat that gets left, right? Because say your term goes from instead of 3 weeks, it goes to 5 weeks, right? So that's 2 weeks of lost rent right there. Well, you couple that and say that's over 50 or 75 or 100 units. Well, think about how much lost rent collectively is lost in the year as you're turning that property. So the more you can fine tune and eliminate that gap, well, the more revenue that quickly comes back in that property. And that's hard to track if you're not paying attention to it. But it's really gauging your renovation plan and how you're tracking to that renovation plan and how you can continue to update to your current renovation status.
Yeah. And do you have any particular tools from a technology standpoint that you're using to efficiently manage the assets and sort of manage that project, make sure you're staying on schedule? Is it just an Excel spreadsheet, or are you using any type of software at that point?
Asana has been very good to us. Using Asana, that gives alerts, gives tracking measures. That's been very good.
Got it. Well, so I do want to back up now.
Sure.
On our podcast, we always like to talk about that first commercial deal, right? And people want to understand how you broke into the space. So I know I'm taking you back a little ways. We're going back to 2017, if I got that right.
Correct.
But if you can, let's talk about that very first deal. I think you mentioned a 94 unit deal. Just give us a high level overview of how you got involved in that deal, how you found it, what the deal was, and how you structured it.
Interesting to the point, that was it was probably a property that if we weren't as patient, would never come to us. And that's funny enough. There was a 50 unit that we just didn't come up to pricing on right before that we were not paid, not really thinking in the future. And if I look at that asset today, that would have been a stellar buy. But at that moment, we weren't ready. So then the 94 unit came up. We actually found that through the management company we were working at the time. The management company knew of the family, was looking to, of course, sell this property, right? And it just so happened that the owner of the property, he was like in his 90s, had passed away. And the kids now had inherited this property, but the kids are now in their 50s and 60s, no longer kids, right? So they're out of state. They're not really managing the property. They actually have something like 1,000 single family houses as well. And they saw this as the outlier of the difficulty. And they were like, well, we want to keep the single family houses, and then we'll just, we'll sell off this 94, albatross to them, right? But with this 94 unit, there was a ton of upside. They had like 4 maintenance guys when they really needed 1. It was a greatly managed property in terms of the property itself by the owner, because the owner had actually built this in the 70s, right? So it was really cared for. But a lot of this was that they were just keeping it full for the sake of not having to do work. So, and in the same part, the vacancy rate in that area was like 2 or 3% at the time. All the other properties were around this were completely fully occupied at $100 plus on premium on rents, just for classic units. However, the leasing person there had no incentive. There was about 6 or 7 vacant units at the time across that board that half of them are rent ready. And she was, and for the time we held the property, we never had to market because there was so much foot traffic. Mm-hmm. But we found out later, even the leasing person, like even the collections problems they were having, is that she wasn't empowered to even collect rent. You had to take this down to the office that was like 3 or 4 miles away. So there were just so many inefficiencies on property. They weren't allowing pet rents when, of course, they had like 6 pets, right? And then all the other neighboring properties did. They weren't doing application fees, just very basic implementation of what could be done. They had 2 laundry rooms. All the surrounding buildings didn't. Both their laundry rooms were down. So we were able to get those on board, put a laundry contract, get a cable contract. But the negotiation was interesting because they were looking for a price point of 3.2 million. And at that time, it was a more forgiving market. We went in and we actually offered 2.1 million. And they said, well, thank you for that offer. Our counter is 3.2 million. And we said, well, thank you very much. That will be good. Right. So we went away. Right. Gotcha. That was probably, I think it was either right at the end of 2016 or beginning of 2017. However, lo and behold, the same narrative probably happened for countless other buyers where they're like, it's just not worth this, and went away. However, a couple months later, we just kept tracking the property and filed back and said, hey, you think we could just put another offer in front of them? And they said, sure. So we put another offer in front of them. We had come up to something in like 2.2 million. So it's not like we moved the needle that much. And within 3 hours, we had a counter back at 2.6 million. Right. And so the times had changed, right? They had become more realistic, of course, about the market and the asset they had. So we, after back and forth for a bit, we got down to 2.3 million, which was a stellar win for us. Wow. Got into that property at a great time. And pretty much 13 months later, we ended up refining the property out and we ended up appraised right over 3.2 million. Oh, right. So it's pretty easy move. Once we got things in place, it was just finding where all the gaps are and how we could optimize the property.
Yeah. Love that. And what's the status of that deal today? I know that was your first deal back in 2017. Where's it at today?
We sold that in January of 2020. So huge turn with a huge win for our investors. It was a big landfall. So it was a very nice property, right? But at that time, that was right before COVID, but we thought a lot of things were shifting in the market. So we looked like, right before COVID, we looked like we were, crystal ball readers kind of thing. But it served a really good spot for a launch off property for sure.
Oh, that's great. And I'm curious, did you, from a deal structure perspective, who did you get involved with? What was your sort of role early on in that process? With it being your first deal, it's not uncommon to sort of partner with someone that has a little bit more experience. Was that your story on this deal, or did you just go into it and attack it? How did it look for you?
So we went in, attacked it, and wore all the hats. So we did it kind of against the grain there. Yeah, we took it as we did a syndication here. What we had done before this is that through the search for this asset type is that we had gone out to our friends and family, right, and let them know what we were doing. So we basically started to warm them up for what we were going to find and just let them understand how this works, right? Because the most people, they don't know what syndication is. They don't think apartment investing is available to them. They think it's big REITs or other companies. So if you try and bring all that when you have the deal and then you need money, it usually comes back with a no. It's just too much for you to put in front of someone. So we were doing this months ahead of time to give people the upcoming knowledge of what we were going to do, right? Because they knew us from other spaces. We didn't have this energy, but they knew how we had done in other spaces, right? So got a lot of interest, and we basically went out there and got, we'll call it soft commitments for future investment. So we were starting to now also put ourselves in a position here where we knew that we could potentially, nothing's in the bank, but potentially go back and raise money. So the cool thing about this is when we got the deal in contract, we said, hey, listen, I knew you were talking about putting 25 or 50K into this. We went back to our investors and we were able to raise, I think it was the 700 or 800 in the day, right? Because the work had already been done. So then on that part, we were able to go there. We had a good management company we worked with. We just kept putting together the partners there. and then empowering the partners to help us for referrals, right, and build the team that way. But we didn't get the asset first, right? We worked in the market, we worked on putting the team together, we worked on putting the investors together. Then when we got the asset, then we started just putting the puzzle pieces together. Where things unravel is that if you find the property, there's always that thing. We find the deal and the money will come, sure, but then you have to go out there and maybe ask for it, beg for it, need it. I don't want to be in that position. I want to provide an opportunity to investors where they have the ability to make a good decision. I don't want to be like, hey, I'm closing in 3 weeks. Hey, are you good? Like, I want to be, here's the presentation of what's potential, the opportunity here. We've talked about this. We're going to look for this in the future. And when we do, we'd love to present it to you. That's a better way to give them the ability to make a good, sound decision and not feel pressured. But the same thing with the team too, is you don't want to be rushed into a team just because now you need to be prepared for the next step of it. So the more you can do on the front side and be, I'll say, aggressively patient with your process, that's going to lead you to the best success as you continue to carry forward in your business.
Yeah, I love that. And great to hear about someone that went and took a deal down on their own without, sort of easing into the space. It's very common to hear about that. You partner, you raise a little bit of capital, maybe you do some due diligence, maybe, whatever it might be. But you guys went and took it down on your own. Now, granted, you did have some experience in the real estate space. You had been known for that. So it wasn't a completely big jump for you. It was an adjacent move to go from what you were doing into the multifamily space. But still big enough move that I'm sure it did take some stretching for you and your wife. So I want to start winding our conversation down here, but I've got a few questions for you. Before I dive into my final two, I got to talk to you about, ultra running, and I think you're a CrossFit guy. I don't know, but talk to us a little bit about ultra running. How did you get into that? And just tell me a little bit about that.
I just started running a lot back when I was in New York City, like late 2008, 2009, just because you're active with friends doing sports, and then no one goes and let's pick a basketball, right? And so you're like, okay, what else? And so I just started running. I still don't consider myself really a runner. I just kind of run. That's really my philosophy. I just do it, but it's now been part of when I get up in the morning. 4, 3, 2, 1, I get up, right? Get out of bed, drink a glass of water, have coffee, I meditate, and I start working out. And that will include running. And I just do that. And it's something that's been consistently part of my process, whether I feel like it or not. And that's helped me just evolve and continue to evolve. And when okay, it's raining, you don't feel good, still do it, right? And so when you put that into process, it's helped me really continue to feel, or I guess I can mentally adapt to be ready for new opportunities, right? Whether they're good or bad. And with ultra running, it was just that next piece. A couple of years ago, I heard about this and I was like, well, that's cool. I'll go try it, right? And it's pretty much half your body and then half your mind, right? And it depends where that race comes up. Is that, you could run, when I do a 100-mile race, lots of times I'll see people who are signed up at the 100, stop at the 50, right? Because their mind has said, I've done enough, right? But their body's like, no, I'm cool. But their mind is already put in there. And so the piece with this that goes for a lot of business, multifamily, and others is that we set so much expectation on the goal without realizing that the journey is where you're going to spend the max majority of your time. So if I was to say today, I've never run a 100-mile race today, I'm going to start this race, man, I just can't think about running 100 miles. Well, yeah, of course you can. You have not done that. But if we can section this out and say, well, can I just get to the first mile and just figure it out from there? And then you do, right? And then you say, well, let me just get to the drink station, get there 5 miles and see kind of what happens. Say, okay, cool, I'm here. Then get to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And all of a sudden you're at 20 miles, and then at 50 miles, and then maybe at 75 miles, say, well, can I just get to the bridge? Okay, cool. Let me just get to the bridge. Well, can I just run another 500 steps? Okay, let me just, I'll get there. I can just figure it out. And maybe it's another 20 steps, 200 steps, and all of a sudden you look back and say, okay, 100 miles. And that's pretty much the evolution of most of our lives. But we get so caught up in the Instagram, oh, that guy's got a Bentley and a mansion, so I don't have that by tomorrow. I'm a failure. I should go hide in a closet. Right. And so if you can get back to just the I guess we'll say the mile, right? The 100-mile mindset of just saying that the steps along the process is where the journey is going to be. So keep getting to that next point, and that's going to uncover the next question for you. right? So in multifamily, the best part, so yeah, sure, I did that property by myself, but I surrounded myself with a lot of people who were successful in the space. So when a question came up, it wasn't me just trying to like Google like blue sky laws, right? Or blue sky filings for my investors. It was like I go call a friend or I go talk to the syndication lawyer, right? So you have the team members around you that can help you when that next question comes up, because the journey to success is usually knowing that you don't know the next question you have to ask, and getting to the answer is understanding what are those new questions I need to ask. And when you do, that allows you to continue to move forward in your journey in your life.
That's great. And I just realized why you wake up at 4:32 a.m. That's cool.
Yeah, and I give me a good path, because at this point you just like you don't want to lose from the start. And most of the time it's so easy to set your alarm, but you say 4, 3, 2, 1, just get up. Like once you're up out of bed, like you're typically not getting back in. Just get up, just go, and you're the 7 more minutes you want to sleep, or the 15 more minutes, like you're never like, oh, I'm good. Right now I'm good. Thank God I hit that sleep button. Like, perfect. Those 12 minutes, I'm perfect for the rest of the day. Like there's no purpose except setting yourself out on the wrong foot.
Love it. All right, a couple final questions for you before we end here. First one is, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing right now in your business that we could all learn from?
You're always on the cusp of 2 points, right? So the market's always driven by, lack of leads, but abundance of money, or abundance of leads or lack of money. So right now we're tearing to lots of money in the space, more difficult for the lead set. So it's currently looking at the adaptation of where the market's driving and just trying to trend in a conservative nature to meet where the market can go going forward, right? With supply constraints, with housing constraints, seeing a lot of these markets here where you're at 5, 7, 10%, right, of rent growth, but understanding that at a certain point that has to nosedive. The American people, workforce class people cannot afford 10% on year rent growth, because their paycheck is not tracking to that. So being realistic with your forecast and sticking to that, and understanding that, a deal today that doesn't happen does not mean there's no deals in the future. And of course, as it said, the best deal is the deal you don't do, right? Because you don't want to, these are harder opportunities to get into, but also harder opportunities to get out. Yeah. So understanding that nature in you and your business philosophy and being patient with your process gets us back to our aggressively patient model that allows us to have the best success in our projects.
What's one thing that in your business that you're just absolutely crushing right now, doing very, very well, that we could all learn from?
The ability to, I wish I would say that's a good question, but we've been able to get our business plan moving quicker than we want in a good fashion. And so it might be 2 parts. We might have been too conservative out of the gate with our business plan, but I think we were realistic. But just trying to size the piece of the puzzle as quickly as possible, and not waiting on others. I think being patient has a certain point, but there's a certain level of impatience to a reasonable standpoint. If something's not happening accordingly, if you believe it should and can, then being able to change that narrative quickly and not waiting. Most times we wait and just say, well, let me just see what happens over the next couple of days. Well, it's going to be the same thing that happened a couple of days before that, right? If someone's not performing or something not happening to plan, the plan doesn't magically get better, right? That's lots of times where even, when you buy a property, you don't keep the prior management company, right? The tenants already have a bad taste, whether that management company could be great. The majority of the time, like it won't be good, right? And the thought that management company is going to magically turn around for you as the owner is typically not going to happen. So you're part of the process, just being ready to implement a process, noting when it's not working accordingly, and being very realistic when you have to pivot, and also be clear with your investors, right? We send communication for our investors. And that's probably another one I could lead into, is that we are very clear with communication for our investors. Every month they get a communication from us right in the middle of the month. We talk about everything happening on the property, all the good, all the things that are not working to plan, and how we're pivoting accordingly, right? And any other open items. And we do that consistently, and allows our investors to understand really the investment they've made, and how the property is performing.
Yeah, love it. Well, final question for you, Jason. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you and learn more about what you guys have going on?
Yeah, sure. So you can go over to YarusiHoldings.com. So YARUSI. If you go over there, find everything about the investments we're working on. If you want to talk about investing with us in the future, the mastermind 7-figure multifamily we run, see a lot about us there. Find that, and feel free to reach out.
Awesome. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. If you've enjoyed our conversation with Jason today, go down into the show notes right now, click on one of those links, and reach out to his team. Jason, an honor to have you on the show. Thank you for sharing your journey with us, and a lot of tips and insights into how you have navigated this space over, a period of 5 years now at this point, maybe longer than that. No longer than that, 2017. Yep. So you've been at it for a while. So thank you for sharing your journey with us, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thank you, David.